It started as just another morning at little Fern's daycare. Finger paints splattered across tiny hands, giggles echoed through the hallways, and crayons clattered onto laminated tables like any other day. But then, a teacher named Miss Clara noticed something different. One of the toddlers, a quiet, wide-eyed little boy named Jonah, wasn't drawing the usual smiling stick figures or colorful rainbows. Instead, he had filled page after page with the same odd symbol. Over and over, almost obsessively. It wasn't childish scribble. It had shape, structure, and something about it made the hair on Clara's neck stand up. At first, she brushed it off as imagination. Kids draw all kinds of strange things. But Jonah was only 3, and the way he fixated on the symbol, his focus, the pressure of his strokes, the way he seemed disconnected while doing it, wasn't typical. Clara watched him for days. Each morning, the first thing he did was grab a black crayon and draw that same symbol. No colors, no words, just that symbol, always in the center of the page, always alone. When she gently asked him what it meant, Jonah didn't speak. He simply pointed at the paper and whispered, "Mommy says don't tell." That was the moment everything shifted. The weight in Clara's chest tightened. Something wasn't right. A child that age shouldn't carry secrets that deep. She looked again at the symbol, an unfamiliar pattern that seemed too deliberate, too specific for a toddler to invent. Driven by a gut feeling she couldn't shake, Clara took the drawing to the school counselor. And what happened next unraveled a heartbreaking truth hidden beneath the surface of crayons and construction paper. That strange symbol, it wasn't random. It was a cry, a silent, coded scream from a child too small to articulate what no child should ever have to experience. A signal someone had finally seen. This story is not about superstition. It's not about overreacting. It's about the terrifying reality that some of the loudest cries for help are drawn in silence, and how one teacher's decision to pay attention may have saved a life. Stay with me, because what she uncovered will shake you to the core. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Her thoughts spun around that black crayon and the way Jonah's tiny hand gripped it with a steadiness far beyond his age. She had taught hundreds of toddlers over the years, each one with their quirks and colors. But this wasn't a phase or a habit. It felt like something deeper, something urgent. She found herself staring at the image again, the strange spiral enclosed in a square with jagged lines radiating outward. It didn't look like anything she recognized, but it looked deliberate. The next morning, Clara arrived early. She photocopied Jonah's drawing and brought it with her to the daycare director, Ms. Hayden. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" she asked. Ms. Hayden frowned, tilting her head. "Probably just a symbol from a cartoon or a toy," she said dismissively. "Kids mimic what they see all the time." Clara nodded, but her gut twisted tighter. It wasn't what she had hoped to hear. Something inside her refused to settle. Jonah came in later than usual that day, holding his mother's hand tightly, his face pale and eyes vacant. Clara greeted them both, watching closely. The mother's smile was stiff, too rehearsed. When Clara bent to say hello to Jonah, he didn't speak. He simply reached for the crayon basket and pulled out the black one again. He walked straight to the art table, sat down in silence, and began to draw the symbol once more, without hesitation, without pause. This time, Clara watched every movement. The lines were the same, every stroke repeated with precision, like a pattern memorized, not through joy, but through fear. After he finished, Jonah looked up. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. Instead, he slid the drawing across the table toward Clara, as if asking her, begging her, to do something with it. She picked it up, her hands trembling now. That afternoon, she took the drawing to the school counselor, Ms. Ruth Lang. Ruth's eyes narrowed the moment she saw it. "Clara, this isn't just some child's doodle. I've seen this before." The room grew still. "Where?" Clara asked. Ruth's voice dropped. "In trauma therapy, this is a dissociation symbol. Some kids are taught to draw it when they feel unsafe or need to disassociate from pain. It's a coping mechanism, but it's not something they invent on their own." The air felt heavier in the counselor's office after that. Clara sat still, her heart pounding, as Ruth carefully placed the drawing into a file. "Where did he learn it?" Clara asked. "How does a 3-year-old even know what dissociation is?" Ruth shook her head. "He doesn't. That's the point. Children this young don't understand what they're feeling, so they repeat what they're taught, or what they see in someone else, often from someone older who has been through it themselves. Clara's mind spiraled. She thought about Jonah's mother, the way her hands gripped his shoulders too tightly a drop-off, the way her smile seemed to vanish the second she thought no one was looking. There had always been something guarded about her, but it was hard to question a parent without evidence. Hard to speak up without feeling like you might be wrong. Still, Clara couldn't ignore what she'd seen, or what Jonah hadn't said. They decided to observe Jonah more closely. Clara began documenting every interaction. She noticed he flinched at loud sounds, especially shouting, even if it came from the playground outside. He avoided eye contact when spoken to directly, and clung to his drawings like lifelines. But the most telling moment came during nap time, when Clara saw him press the crayon to his blanket, tracing the symbol with invisible strokes. Even in rest, his hands couldn't let go of the pattern. Clara brought up the concern again with Ms. Hayden, this time armed with Ruth's insights. Still, the director hesitated. "Do you realize what you're implying?" she asked, voice tight. "If we report this, and it turns out to be nothing, we could be damaging a family's life." Clara swallowed hard. "And if we don't?" "And we're right." There was a silence between them that said everything. The fear of being wrong. The risk of doing nothing. That night, Clara received a message from Ruth. She had cross-checked the symbol against trauma-related materials from her therapy certification. It matches one used in group trauma programs for women and children escaping abuse, she said. It's meant to be a silent way to ask for help when words are dangerous. Clara, someone taught him this. Someone who knew exactly what it meant. The next morning, Clara arrived before sunrise. The daycare was silent, but her thoughts were not. She walked past the art table and stared at Jonah's usual seat. It felt different now, like a place where something sacred and terrifying had happened. The air carried weight. A message had been sent from a child who couldn't speak it. Clara knew there was no turning back. She printed every one of Jonah's drawings, highlighted her observation notes, and handed them to Ruth. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's file the report." They submitted a formal concern to Child Protective Services that afternoon. It wasn't an accusation. It was a call for attention. A request to investigate, to protect. Clara felt torn inside. She had always believed in giving families the benefit of the doubt. But Jonah's silence wasn't just a phase. It was a shield, and she couldn't let him fight alone. The report included the symbol, the behaviors, and the quote, "Mommy says don't tell." By the time Jonah arrived the next morning, everything felt fragile. Clara greeted him gently, noticing again how he avoided his mother's gaze. The woman seemed distracted, glancing behind her as if expecting someone. When she left, Jonah immediately reached for the crayons, but this time he didn't go for black. He picked red, then yellow, and then he paused, looking at Clara as if asking permission. She nodded. He drew a house, crooked and shaky, but a house nonetheless. Inside, a tiny figure stood in a doorway. It was the first drawing he had made that wasn't the symbol. Clara leaned down beside him. "Who is that?" she asked softly. Jonah looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Me," he said. Just one word, but it hit like thunder. Clara smiled gently, but inside she was unraveling. Something is shifting, she thought. He's trying to come out of it. And maybe he believed he wasn't alone anymore. That afternoon, CPS arrived. Discreet, respectful. A woman named Marla spoke with Clara and Ruth, reviewing everything again. Then she asked to see Jonah. They kept it light, playful. They didn't interrogate, just asked questions while he drew. At first, he was silent. Then, without warning, he reached for the black crayon again and began to draw the symbol. Slowly, deliberately. Marla nodded. "That's enough for today," she said. But Clara could see in her eyes. She recognized it too. 2 days later, CPS contacted the daycare again. Clara's hands trembled when she answered the phone. "We made a home visit," Marla said. There were inconsistencies in the mother's story. Jonah's room had no toys, no books. He wasn't listed on any pediatric records in the last 6 months. And then, her voice dropped. "We found the same symbol, carved into the underside of his bed frame. Multiple times." Clara nearly dropped the phone. The symbol wasn't just a cry. It was a code woven into his daily life. It was how Jonah had been surviving. Marla continued. We're placing him in protective custody for now. There will be a full investigation. It may take time, but he's safe." The words hit Clara with a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Safe, but not whole. Not yet. That afternoon, Jonah didn't come to daycare. His chair sat empty, his crayons untouched. The silence was deafening. Clara stood near the art table longer than usual, unsure what to do with the emptiness. But as she reached for the crayon bin, she found something beneath it. A folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. The same crooked house. But this time, two figures stood in the doorway. One was smaller. One wore glasses. Beneath it, written in uneven letters, "Thank you." Clara sat down and cried for the first time since this began. Not because of sadness, but because of hope. Jonah had drawn himself in the light, and he had drawn her. He had chosen her as part of his escape, part of his safety. She had seen what no one else had, and he knew. Somehow he knew. Later that week, Clara received word that Jonah had been placed with a foster family trained in trauma care. They were kind, patient, and familiar with the signs of deep emotional pain. He would have therapy, a stable home, and, most importantly, a chance. Clara stared at the drawing again. It no longer felt like paper. It felt like a bridge. One tiny boy had walked across it and survived. The daycare wasn't the same without Jonah. His absence lingered in the corners of the room, in the untouched crayons, in the way Clara found herself glancing toward the door each morning as if he might walk back in. The other children, too young to fully understand, simply asked, "Where's Jonah?" Clara would smile gently and say, "He's with some new friends right now." It was true, but it didn't stop the ache. Clara found herself rethinking every interaction she had ever had with him. The way he clutched his drawings like secrets. The way he whispered instead of spoke. The moments he'd stare at his own hands, as if they belonged to someone else. She hadn't seen it right away, but when she did, she hadn't hesitated. And now, her decision had given him something most children never get the chance to reclaim: a future. One morning, about 3 weeks after Jonah had left, a letter arrived. Handwritten, with no return address. Inside was a small note on blue paper, a crayon heart drawn in the corner. It read, "He sleeps through the night now. He's starting to laugh. He asked to buy new markers. Thank you for being the first safe place." There was no signature, but Clara didn't need one. She recognized the voice of someone who had learned what it meant to rebuild a life. That afternoon, she sat at the art table, surrounded by the noise of playful chatter and scattered puzzle pieces. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began drawing. Not a house, not the symbol, just a sun rising above a quiet hill. A new start. For her. For Jonah. For the many children she would meet in the years to come who might never say what was wrong, but would carry it in the way they colored the world. And so, Clara kept watching. Not just for odd drawings or whispered warnings, but for the silences, the patterns, the quiet corners where pain likes to hide. She had learned that listening wasn't always about hearing words. Sometimes it was about noticing what others ignore. Because in those small, overlooked moments, lives are either lost or saved. Weeks turned to months. Spring arrived with its green shoots and sunlight spilling through the windows of the daycare. Clara moved through the rhythms of daily life. Snack time, story time, scraped knees, and little victories. But she never stopped noticing. And she never forgot. Jonah had taught her that trauma didn't always shout. Sometimes it drew. One day, while helping a new child named Ava with finger painting, Clara noticed something familiar. Ava wasn't painting rainbows or flowers like the other kids. She was painting small boxes, neatly aligned, dark and repetitive. Her fingers moved quickly, precisely. Clara leaned in. "What's that, sweetie?" Ava looked up. "I don't know. Mommy draws them sometimes." When she's sad. The answer chilled Clara, but she smiled gently, masking the alarm in her chest. Clara didn't panic. She didn't jump to conclusions, but she began paying closer attention, asking the right questions, observing without judgment. She kept a log, just like she had with Jonah. And once again, she consulted Ruth, the counselor. Together, they began to piece together another story, this time from shapes and silence instead of words. It wasn't as clear, not yet, but it was enough to begin again. And as Clara sat at her desk that evening, reviewing the notes, she realized something deeper. This isn't just a job anymore. This is a calling. She was no longer just a teacher. She was a guardian of stories children didn't know how to tell. A protector of truths hidden in crayon lines and whispered sentences. Outside the window, children played in the soft afternoon light, their laughter rising like music. And inside, at a small table covered in paper and paint, a new child was reaching out. Not with words, but with symbols. And this time, Clara was already listening. As Clara continued to observe Ava, she noticed patterns too familiar to dismiss. The way the girl startled at sharp sounds. How she clung to her blanket during nap time, eyes wide open, scanning the room as if danger could walk in at any moment. Clara didn't want to overreact, but she knew better than to ignore what she was seeing. These weren't coincidences, they were signs. And she promised herself after Jonah that she would never miss the signs again. Ava's drawings became her language. Day after day, she painted enclosed spaces, rooms without windows, small cages with stick figures inside. No sun, no trees, just walls. When Clara asked about them, Ava would shrug or say just playing, but her eyes always darted away. One morning, she painted a figure alone in a dark room. Clara pointed to it and asked, "Is she lonely?" Ava nodded. "She gets locked in when she's bad." That answer struck like a lightning bolt. Clara didn't react outwardly, but inside, alarms rang loud. She immediately brought the drawing to Ruth. They agreed. It was time to start documenting everything officially again. Ruth reached out to Ava's mother with gentle inquiries, but the woman was evasive, defensive. It was all too familiar. The masks, the excuses. Clara had seen this dance before, and she wouldn't let it go unnoticed this time. Clara sat with Ava one day after lunch and asked if she wanted to make a new drawing, any drawing she liked. The girl paused, then carefully picked a pink crayon. For the first time in weeks, she drew a sun. But then, in the corner of the paper, she added a small locked door. She didn't say anything about it, but her hand trembled as she shaded it in. Clara gently placed her own hand over Ava's. "You're safe here," she said. That moment changed something. The next morning, Ava walked in and handed Clara a folded paper before saying a word. Clara opened it slowly. Inside was another drawing, but this one was different. A figure standing outside the locked door, holding a key. And beneath it, in careful letters, Ava had written, "Help her." Clara felt her chest tighten. Ava hadn't said me. But Clara knew. She always knew. The next steps were careful and calculated. Clara and Ruth followed protocol, just as they had with Jonah, filing a formal concern, documenting Ava's drawings, requesting an official wellness check from Child Services. Still, each hour felt agonizingly slow. Clara couldn't unsee the look in Ava's eyes, that trembling hope masked in paper and pastel, the kind of hope that could vanish if someone looked away too soon. Child Protective Services responded swiftly. The visit to Ava's home revealed more than anyone expected: a bedroom with no windows, locks on the outside of doors. A discipline routine, the mother described with chilling nonchalance. "She just needs boundaries," she said. But the agent saw what Clara had feared. Ava wasn't being raised. She was being controlled, punished, broken, one silent day at a time. Ava was removed from the home that evening. Clara didn't sleep. Her hand shook as she imagined the fear Ava must have felt, being taken away by strangers, even if it meant freedom. But the next morning, Clara received a message from the social worker. "She asked for you," it read. She kept saying, "Tell Miss Clara I drew it. Tell her I did it right." Clara's heart cracked, wide open. A few days later, Ava returned, not to daycare, but for a brief, supervised visit. She ran into Clara's arms without a word, just tears. She didn't ask about toys. She didn't ask for snacks. She only whispered, "You saw me." Clara held her close, not letting go. "I did, sweetheart. I always will." That embrace lasted longer than most, and in that quiet, everything they'd been through was spoken without needing to be explained. As Ava left with her foster care coordinator, Clara sat alone in the art room. The crayons, the paint, the soft hum of childhood noise around her. It all felt different now. Heavier. Holier. She glanced at the wall where she'd started pinning the most powerful drawings. At the center hung Jonah's house with the two figures. Now, beside it, Ava's door with the key. Together, They told a story no one had spoken aloud, but one that Clara would never stop telling. Spring melted fully into summer, and though the days grew longer, Clara felt the weight of the stories she carried deepening. Every child's drawing now came with a question. Every silence carried potential meaning. She had become fluent in the unspoken language of pain, a dialect taught in symbols, in eyes that avoid, in crayons used more like shields than tools for joy. But she wasn't overwhelmed. She was awake, and she understood that sometimes awareness was the greatest act of love. The daycare began to shift with her. Other teachers took notice. They started asking new questions, documenting unusual behavior with more care. It wasn't paranoia, it was presence. Inspired by what Clara had seen with Jonah and Ava, the staff requested additional training with trauma-informed specialists. Ruth led the sessions, and Clara spoke during each one, not as an expert, but as a witness. "You don't need to be a therapist," she said. "You just need to notice." One of the new staff members, a young assistant named Ezra, approached Clara after a session. "I never realized how much a child could be saying without words," he said. "I used to think drawing time was just about keeping them occupied. But now, I see it." Clara smiled softly. Art is how the soul breathes when it doesn't feel safe to speak. Ezra looked over at a wall where several children's drawings were displayed. "Then we've been breathing through those pictures all along." Later that week, a boy named Malik joined the daycare. He was 4, shy, and deeply withdrawn. His enrollment paperwork was incomplete. His guardian said little. But Clara felt the same pull she had felt with Jonah, an invisible thread that connected silence to suffering. On his first day, Malik didn't draw anything. He just stared at the paper, occasionally pressing a single crayon against it without moving his hand. By the end of that week, however, Malik made his first mark. A series of dark shapes in the corner of the paper, abstract, uneven, almost angry. But he drew them with concentration, with intention. Clara didn't interrupt. She just knelt beside him, whispering, "It's okay to draw what hurts." Malik didn't respond. But when she stood to leave, he slid the paper toward her and said, barely audible, "Keep it safe." She folded it with care and placed it beside the others. As Clara watched Malik open up through shape and shadow, she was reminded once again that healing never followed a straight path. One morning, he arrived with scratches on his arms. Small, fresh. When she asked gently where they came from, he looked away and said, "My fault. I broke the rule." That phrase sat in Clara's chest like a stone. Children don't invent guilt like that on their own. It is given to them, taught by fear, reinforced by silence. She documented the incident immediately, then sat with Ruth to review the drawings. Malik had created several new ones, each with a black figure towering over smaller ones. The proportions were distorted, the shadows reaching beyond the page. But then there was one, a picture of a small figure hiding beneath a table, a single blue dot above its head. Clara pointed. "That one," she said. "That's not just hiding. That's waiting." Ruth nodded gravely. It might be time. They prepared a new report, detailing not just what Malik had drawn, but what he hadn't said. The way his shoulders tensed at every adult voice. The way he flinched at kindness, as though expecting it to turn cruel. It was a pattern they knew too well. But this time, they also had something else. A note Malik had left, folded under his seat. One sentence. "I wish I could live in my pictures." The report was sent. CPS responded quickly. They had received no prior complaints, but Clara's documentation, paired with the consistency of Malik's drawings and behaviors, was enough to act. That weekend, they visited the home. The guardians denied everything, of course. "He's sensitive," they said. "He makes things up." But what they couldn't explain was the locked closet, the bruises, the terrified dog in the backyard that hadn't been fed in days. Malik was removed the following Monday. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't cry. He just walked toward Clara and wrapped his arms around her, pressing his face into her stomach. "You believe the pictures," he whispered. Clara knelt to his level and said, "I always will." And as he stepped into the waiting car, she knew she hadn't just saved a child. She had translated his silence into safety. The room where Clara kept the children's drawings had become more than just a bulletin board. It was a sanctuary. Each image, carefully pinned or placed, held fragments of stories that had been buried too deep for words. She called it the Wall of Voices. But unlike most classroom art displays, this one wasn't colorful or cheerful. It was honest. And in its honesty, it was profoundly beautiful. Teachers from other daycares began visiting. Word had spread about Clara's approach, how she had turned observation into intervention, and how she was teaching others to listen without waiting for words. One visiting educator stood in front of the wall and wept. "I think I missed this," she whispered. "There was a child, and now I can't stop wondering what their drawings were trying to tell me." Clara didn't offer comfort. She just placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Then promise yourself you'll never miss it again." One day, Clara received a package. No return address, only the initials JL. Inside was a single frame drawing. A tree, bright green, full of leaves, and beneath it, two stick figures holding hands. In one corner, in handwriting that had grown steadier over time, it said, "Jonah, age 6. Clara sat down on the floor, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He had drawn life. He had drawn connection. He had drawn peace. That afternoon, she placed the drawing in the center of the Wall of Voices. It didn't silence the pain surrounding it, but it reminded everyone that healing was possible, that silence, once broken, could make room for laughter. That darkness, once named, could give way to light. Jonah's tree stood as both a memorial and a promise. A message from a child who had once whispered through symbols and now shouted through color. As more students came and went, Clara noticed something new. Kids who had never experienced trauma still gravitated toward the wall. They asked questions. They listened. They made space. And slowly, a new culture took root. One where emotions weren't hidden, where pictures weren't dismissed, and where silence was treated not as defiance, but as a language still waiting to be understood. Months passed, and with them came new challenges, new faces, and, of course, new drawings. One boy, Julian, arrived after a domestic dispute had made headlines in the local paper. Clara didn't know the full story, but she knew the signs. Julian didn't speak for 2 weeks. He colored with deep reds and blacks, his lines angry and overlapping. He refused to use yellow. "It's fake," he muttered once when another child handed him a yellow crayon. "Sun's not real." Clara didn't push. She simply made space beside him, day after day. She left him notes in a shared notebook, and one day, he wrote back, "Do you think the sky ever hears the screaming?" That sentence stopped her breath. But she wrote back, "Yes, and it keeps shining anyway. Just for you." From that moment, their quiet exchange grew. Words, sketches, questions. Julian never spoke out loud, but he didn't have to. Julian's breakthrough came on a rainy morning. He walked into the room, dropped his soaked backpack, and pulled out a folded paper. It was a drawing of a house, windows cracked, a storm above it. But in one window, a small candle glowed. Below it, he had written, "It's not much, but it's warm." Clara placed the drawing on the wall, next to Jonah's tree. A flicker of warmth beside the roots of something strong. That same week, Ruth gave Clara a folder filled with anonymous student reflections. In one, a child had written, "Miss Clara doesn't just read books. She reads our silence." Another said, "When I'm scared, I draw, because she sees it, and she knows what to do." These weren't just compliments. They were affirmations that the space she had built, the listening she had cultivated, wasn't only noticed. It was saving lives. And as Clara closed the folder, looked around the room, and heard the sound of crayons scraping gently across paper, she felt something sacred settle in her chest. They're not just children drawing. They are survivors, artists, messengers. They are children whispering truth into a world that often refuses to listen. But here, in this place, someone always listens. One crisp morning, as Clara unlocked the daycare and walked toward her classroom, she noticed a small envelope taped to the door. It had no name on the outside, just a simple drawing of a heart with a crayon through it. She opened it slowly and found a folded letter, written in a child's careful, uneven handwriting. "My brother said you saved him with colors. He doesn't cry at night anymore. Can you help me too?" There was no signature, but Clara didn't need one. Another child was reaching out, one drawing at a time. Inside, Her students were already arriving. The energy was light, but Clara's eyes searched the room differently now. Each movement, each glance, each silence was meaningful. She knew the writer was likely there, somewhere in the room, hiding behind quiet or laughter or distraction. It was never obvious. Pain didn't advertise itself in children. It hid. But Clara had learned how to notice its shadow. That day, she sat beside several children during art time, watching the lines they drew, the colors they chose, the way their hands moved. One boy, Ezra, was especially still, methodical, but slow, as if each line cost him something. He drew a row of windows. Behind each one, a face. Some with eyes, some without. Clara leaned in and asked, "What are they looking at?" He didn't answer, but he circled one window and read and whispered, "That one's mine." Her breath caught. She didn't respond with questions. She just nodded. Ezra didn't speak again, but when art time ended, he slipped the paper into her hand without a word. Clara placed it carefully in her folder and added a note to his file. She didn't know what his home life was yet, but she knew how to begin. Watch. Wait. Make space. Sometimes that was the loudest kind of help. That night, she reread the anonymous letter again, and she understood something with painful clarity. The children were beginning to tell each other. They were passing the truth quietly, child to child, pain to pain. She listens. She sees. She helps. It was a kind of trust that couldn't be taught or trained. It had to be earned, with every tear caught, every picture understood, every silence honored. The following week, Ruth joined Clara during free drawing time. They moved silently around the classroom, glancing at sketchbooks and easels, speaking only when needed. It wasn't surveillance, it was witnessing. Ruth paused beside Ezra and asked if he wanted to show her his latest picture. He didn't say a word, but handed it over. This time, the windows were boarded up. The same red circle marked the bottom corner. Inside the circle was a single word, barely legible. Trapped. Ruth's face tightened. "He's speaking more now," she whispered to Clara. "And we're hearing it clearly." They began the process again. Notes, observations, gentle questions. Ezra didn't resist. In fact, he seemed almost relieved, like a weight had finally been recognized. He began seeking out Clara during breaks, asking if she wanted to see his new work, or sometimes just sitting near her without speaking. It was a quiet companionship, but one filled with truth. Then came a morning when Ezra arrived with a cut across his cheek. "Fell," he said. But Clara knew. Ruth knew. And when the drawing started showing shadows again, dark figures with reaching arms, locked doors with no knobs, they filed the report. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful, methodical, just like the last time. And again, child services listened. Ezra was placed in temporary care by the end of the week. As he left, he clutched one of his drawings in his hand. Clara walked with him to the door. "Do you want me to keep this one for you?" she asked. Ezra looked down. "No," he said. "I want it with me. So I remember someone saw it." She nodded, kneeling to his level. "I saw you, Ezra. Not just the picture. You." He hugged her so tightly it surprised them both. Later that day, Clara added Ezra's first drawing to the wall of voices. The window circled in red, a face staring back, and she placed it just beside Ava's door with the key. The two drawings whispered to each other in their silence, bound by a truth that only children like them understood. That art was never just play. It was survival, and someone, somewhere, had finally listened. Summer neared its end, and with it came new enrollment forms, new supplies, new children with backpacks too big for their bodies, and sometimes pain too big for their hearts. Clara had grown used to the rhythm, but she never let herself grow numb. She had made a quiet vow. Every child will be seen. It didn't matter if they were loud or silent, bold or shy. She would watch, listen, and wait for drawings, for changes, for symbols too precise to ignore. Among the new students was a girl named Lila, small for her age, with large eyes that scanned every corner of a room like she was memorizing escape routes. On her first day, she refused to take off her hoodie, even in the heat. During playtime, she sat alone. During art time, she drew. Not objects, not people, just colors. Harsh, overlapping, intense. Entire pages covered in red, then black, then red again. It wasn't the palette that concerned Clara. It was the pressure, The paper tore beneath her crayons. Clara gently introduced herself one-on-one during reading hour. "I like your art," she said. Lila didn't respond. "I can see you're telling a story with it." Still nothing. But the next day, Clara found a folded paper tucked inside her teacher's manual. It was from Lila. A single image, a figure standing in rain, surrounded by red. No words, just the image. But drawn in the corner was something unmistakable, an open door. For Clara, it was the first breath of trust. She began the process again. Quiet observation, shared moments, building safety. And each day, Lila's drawings evolved. The red softened. The doors became larger. Once, she even drew a window with a bird outside. Still no spoken words. But her art screamed louder than voices. Clara carefully documented everything and worked closely with Ruth to determine the right next step. Something was beneath Lila's silence, and it was ready to come up. Then, one afternoon, Clara found Lila sitting at the art table long after the other children had moved on. She had a new drawing in front of her. This time, it showed two figures, one childlike, one taller, both holding hands beneath a tree. Beneath it, in clumsy lettering, were the words, "This one is safe." Clara sat beside her, said nothing, and placed her hand gently on Lila's. The silence between them was sacred, a moment where pain met presence and became peace. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Lila's drawing in her mind. The contrast between the stormy colors she'd used for weeks and the soft green of the tree in her latest picture was striking. It felt like a shift, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, the child had begun to believe in something better: safety, connection, hope. But Clara had learned not to celebrate too quickly. Pain didn't leave overnight. It returned in waves. Sometimes, the light was just a flicker in a long tunnel. The next morning, Lila arrived clutching a small, handmade envelope. She handed it to Clara silently and walked away. Inside was a crayon-written note. "If I tell you a secret, will you still let me draw?" Clara's throat tightened. She wrote back immediately. "Yes. Always. No matter what you tell me." It was taped to the underside of Lila's desk by the end of the day. The bond had formed. The wall had cracked. The truth was coming. Over the following days, Lila's drawings grew more detailed. She started using space intentionally. Doors placed far from figures, windows with cracked glass, stick people curled in corners. Ruth visited during one session and knelt beside her. "Can you tell us about your pictures?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "I don't want to get in trouble." Ruth replied gently. "What if your pictures are already telling us? What if you're already brave?" That night, Clara and Ruth prepared a new report. They had enough. The drawings, the behavior, the note. It pointed to something happening at home, something Lila wasn't ready to verbalize. But art, once again, had filled the space where language failed. CPS responded quickly, thanks to the clear documentation and the precedents from Jonah, Ava, Ezra, and Malik. Lila was visited within 72 hours. Her stepfather was removed from the home that night. When Lila returned to daycare the next day, she didn't speak, but she walked straight to Clara, handed her a new drawing, and hugged her waist. The picture showed a little girl with a suitcase standing beside a large tree. Under the tree sat another girl, Lila herself, smiling, surrounded by crayons. And on the tree trunk, she had written one word in purple: home. By the time autumn leaves began to scatter across the playground, Clara's classroom had become more than just a place for learning. It was a haven, a kind of sanctuary where children could shed their masks, if only for a moment, and speak the language they weren't yet able to say aloud. Not every child carried trauma, but every child carried something, and Clara treated every something with care. Word about her methods had spread beyond the local district. A regional educators' conference invited her to speak about silent signals in early childhood, and though Clara didn't consider herself a speaker, she agreed. She stood before a quiet audience of teachers and caregivers and simply told them the truth. Every time a child hands you a drawing, they're handing you their heart. The question is, are you listening? After her talk, educators lined up to thank her. Some cried. Others whispered their own regrets, students they hadn't noticed in time, or drawings they had tossed away without a second thought. "I thought art time was just a break," one said. "Now I understand it was their only chance to ask for help." Clara nodded. The moment we start seeing drawings as communication, we stop letting silence go unseen. Back at the daycare, the wall of voices had grown. It now filled an entire corner of the room. Carefully arranged were Jonah's tree, Ava's door, Ezra's red window, Malik's candle, and now Lila's tree mark home. Each piece carried a ripple. Teachers brought new students to see it, not to traumatize, but to teach. These pictures help save lives, Clara would say. And yours can too. That week, a boy named Noah stood before the wall and stared for a long time. Then he turned to Clara and asked, "Do these kids come back?" She smiled softly. "Sometimes they do. But even if they don't, they leave behind something strong. Their voices stay here, and their stories help us find the next kid who needs to be seen." Noah nodded, turned back to the wall, and said, "Then I want to make something too." Noah's first drawing was simple: a sun, a swing set, and a smiling boy. But the next day, it changed. The sun was gone. The swing was empty. The smiling boy had no mouth. Clara said nothing, just sat beside him and watched. Over the following week, the boy in the drawing moved farther from the center of the page. His eyes darkened. One hand disappeared. Clara gently asked, "Did something happen to him?" Noah shrugged. He fell. It was vague, but familiar. The coded language of a child who knew too much but trusted too little. Clara began documenting. Again, Ruth visited Noah, played with him, asked about the drawings. "Why is he always alone?" she asked. "Because no one's allowed to be near him," Noah replied. "He's not good." Ruth's heart sank. That wasn't something a 6-year-old should believe about themselves. By now, Clara's system was instinctual. Watch, wait, reflect. Let the child feel seen before they're asked to explain. And it worked. Noah began sitting closer to Clara during group time. He stayed after class to help tidy up. And he started signing his drawings. For someone who listens. One morning, he handed her a new picture with a red scribble across the top and said, "This is what I dream about." The scribble was more than just color. It was a tangle of limbs, eyes, and mouths, chaotic and unsettling. But beneath it was a small blue figure, curled into itself. Clara brought the drawing to Ruth immediately. Together, they pieced together a growing picture. Noah's drawings, his language, the bruises noted discreetly by the nurse. It was enough. Another report was filed. Noah's home visit revealed a relative who had moved in recently, a man with a criminal record and a history of violence. He was removed that same week. When Noah returned, he walked straight to the wall of voices and looked at it for several minutes. Then he handed Clara one last drawing. This one clear, simple, and unshaking. A boy on a swing under a yellow sun, smiling, his mouth wide open. I gave him his voice back, he whispered. The wall of voices had begun as a quiet memorial to unspoken pain. But now it was something else, something alive. Each drawing wasn't just a story preserved. It was a light passed forward. Teachers brought in new students and pointed to it not as a warning, but as a promise. Here, you'll be seen. Here, we listen. And every child who contributed to that wall, knowingly or not, became part of a growing legacy of survival and courage. Clara noticed that other children, those not in crisis, began contributing too. Drawings of joy, of hope, of kindness. A rainbow with the words "For Ava." A treehouse labeled Malik's safe place. Even older students who had moved on returned just to pin up a sketch or a note. "I'm okay now." The wall was no longer only a testimony of pain. It had become a tapestry of healing. A chorus that said, "We made it out. You can too." One afternoon, while sorting supplies, Clara found a drawing she didn't recognize. It had been slipped under her door. A girl sitting at a desk. A large red X over her mouth. In the corner. "It's my turn now." There was no name. No clues. But Clara felt that familiar chill. Somewhere in her care was a child still unseen. She reviewed her roster, her notes. She had to find a child behind the drawing. The wall had become a beacon, and someone was answering its call. Within a few days, she narrowed it down to a girl named Eliana. Quiet, polite, never disruptive, but always watching, always keeping her hands in her pockets. Clara approached her gently during story time and simply said, "Your drawing was very brave." Eliana looked up, startled. "I didn't sign it." Clara smiled. "You didn't have to." The girl's eyes welled with tears. I thought no one would find it. Eliana's story, once it began to unravel, was heartbreakingly familiar. An older sibling in the home, aggressive and controlling. Parents unaware or unwilling to intervene. Eliana had retreated into silence, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she believed no one would believe her. The drawing had been a final attempt, and because of Clara, it wasn't ignored. The wall had once again whispered the truth and been heard. By the end of the school year, Clara had helped over a dozen children find their voice through the language of art. Some had left for new schools, safer homes, better futures. Others remained, still healing, still drawing, but drawing differently now. With more light, with less red, with more figures, more doors, more suns. And through it all, the wall of voices stood quietly in the back of the classroom. Less a decoration, more a sacred witness. On the last day of school, the children presented Clara with a surprise. A giant canvas filled with small handprints in every color imaginable. In the center, a phrase written in gold glitter. Because you saw us, we see ourselves. Clara stood speechless, tears streaking down her face as each child beamed with pride. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reflection. Her belief had become their belief. Her listening had taught them how to speak. Ruth, who had become more than just a counselor, now a friend, a partner in healing, placed a hand on Clara's shoulder and said, "This is more than teaching. This is transformation." And it was. Clara hadn't just instructed letters and numbers. She had built a new kind of education, one where silence had shape and fear had color, and every child was allowed to rewrite their story, one crayon stroke at a time. That evening, Clara stayed late in the classroom. She stood in front of the wall, touching each drawing like a name etched in stone. Jonah's tree, Ava's door, Ezra's window, Malik's candle, Lila's tree, Noah's swing, Eliana's red X. She traced them gently and whispered, "I remember all of you." And she meant it. Because to Clara, these weren't just children she had helped. They were children who had changed her. As the sun set through the classroom window, Clara pinned one last drawing to the center of the wall. A simple image she had made herself. A heart, surrounded by small hands reaching upward. Beneath it, she wrote, "This wall listens. This wall saves. This wall was built by you." Then she turned off the lights, closed the door, and walked into the quiet, knowing that tomorrow, another story would begin, and she would be ready to hear it. The new school year arrived with the crisp air of early fall and the scent of sharpened pencils and possibility. Clara walked through the classroom, now decorated with fresh posters and clean supplies, but her eyes fell naturally to the wall of voices. It remained untouched over the summer break, yet the stories it held had not faded. If anything, their presence had deepened, as if each drawing had rooted itself more firmly in the soul of the room. Among the first to arrive was a boy named Riley. 5 years old, curious but cautious. He observed more than he engaged. During playtime, he hovered near groups but rarely joined. When handed a crayon, he chose blue, every time. Not sky blue, but deep navy, the kind that seemed heavy, like the ocean just before a storm. His first drawing was of a boat in the middle of the sea. No land, no people, just water everywhere. Clara approached carefully. "Is your boat looking for something?" she asked. Riley nodded, but said nothing. The next day, the boat appeared again, this time with a single figure on board, head bowed. On the third day, the figure had no face. Clara documented everything, her instincts on high alert. The repetition wasn't casual. It was storytelling, a child's way of saying, "I feel lost, and I don't know who I am in this storm." She began checking in during snack time. Small questions, gentle presence. She left a note in his cubby. "I like your boat drawings. They feel important." Riley responded the next day, not with words, but by handing her a folded paper. It was a new drawing, the boat again, but this time, a lighthouse stood far in the distance. A thin beam of light reaching across the dark water. Clara knelt beside him and whispered, "The light sees you." From that moment, Riley began opening, still slowly, still carefully, but his boat started to drift closer to shore. He began adding stars to the sky. The ocean softened. Clara placed his third drawing on the wall, next to Noah's swing. The caption Riley added, in crooked letters read, "Almost there." It was enough. It was everything. Clara noticed something different that year, not just in the children, but in the way the staff began to operate. Inspired by the wall of voices, other classrooms started their own variations: corners of courage, journals of quiet, color spaces. Teachers swapped stories about students' breakthroughs that came not through conversation, but through paint, clay, or scribbled lines. What had once been considered free time was now seen as a window into the soul. One of the new teachers, Ms. Daniels, came to Clara during a staff meeting. "I thought your wall was a beautiful idea," she said. "But now I understand it's more than art. It's architecture. It's how kids build bridges back to themselves." Clara smiled. "They don't always need us to rescue them. They just need us to show them where the bridge is." That became a new motto shared among the staff. Point to the bridge. Don't walk past it. Then came Maya, a sweet girl with wild curls and a giggle that could fill a room, until it didn't. One day, she stopped laughing. Her drawings shifted from animals and flowers to broken shapes and long lines that cut across the page. She told a classmate, "I broke something important." Clara listened without hovering. She watched Maya draw a cracked vase over and over. Each day, it shattered in a different way. Finally, Clara sat down beside her during art time and asked, "What was inside the vase?" Maya blinked, as if the question had startled her. "My voice," she said. "It spilled out. Now I can't get it back." Clara responded gently, "Maybe it didn't spill. Maybe it's still here, just waiting for you to pick it up." Maya didn't answer, but the next day, her drawing changed. The vase still cracked, but inside it, a small seed had begun to grow. Clara placed that drawing on the wall with deep care. Beside it, she wrote a new caption: "Even cracked things can grow." The message was not just for Maya. It was for everyone who walked into that room. Because by now, the wall of voices had become something more than symbolic. It was living, breathing proof that healing begins the moment someone decides to draw the truth, and someone else chooses to see it. One chilly October morning, Clara arrived to find a line of drawings neatly placed beneath the wall of voices. They hadn't been pinned up yet, just left in a quiet row, as if waiting to be accepted into something sacred. She knelt to examine them. Stars in the shape of hands, suns rising behind broken houses, a girl giving a flower to her shadow. Each drawing had a child's name written on the back, and each one carried a piece of truth too big for words. She realized what had happened. The children had begun offering their art without being asked, not as a cry for help, but as an act of belonging. The wall was no longer just a place for pain. It had become a gallery of becoming. Some drawings told stories of recovery, others of courage and progress. But each one said the same thing: "I'm part of this. My voice matters here." That day, Clara made a decision. She added a new section to the wall and called it the garden. It was a space reserved for drawings that bloomed out of darkness. Stories of growth, of moments when a child realized they were more than their silence, more than their bruises, more than what had been done to them. Jonah's tree went there. So did Maya's cracked vase with a seed, and Lila's house with the open window. The children took to the idea immediately. They began placing their drawings with care, asking gently, "Can this go in the garden?" Clara always answered with the same soft smile. If it grew from something real, then yes. She didn't need to explain what real meant. They understood. Children always do, especially the ones who've had to learn the weight of truth too soon. And one afternoon, Clara found something tucked behind the crayon box. A small piece of paper with a single sentence written in marker. "This place helps you remember who you are before you got hurt." No name, no signature, but Clara felt the truth of it in her bones. The wall had become a mirror, and every child who stood before it could finally see themselves, not just as survivors, but as artists of their own healing. That winter brought storms and early sunsets, but inside the classroom, the light only grew warmer. Children arrived each morning with drawings already forming in their minds. Some of them even brought pictures from home. One girl, Samira, brought a folded napkin with watercolor birds she'd painted at her grandmother's kitchen table. She said birds don't sing unless they feel safe, she told Clara. So I made them sing. Clara pinned the birds beside Riley's lighthouse and Noah's swing. The wall now hummed with life, not just because of the art, but because of the intention behind each piece. These weren't just images. They were memories rewritten, pain reframed, children taking the darkest things they'd known and shaping them into something beautiful enough to hold in their hands. Meanwhile, the parents had started to notice. Some came in early or stayed late just to stare at the wall. A few asked to take photos. One mother wept as she pointed to her son's drawing and whispered. That was the first day he stopped waking up screaming. Clara never explained the full stories. She didn't need to. The drawings did it for her. Each one was a testimony of what happens when someone chooses to see. That month, Clara hosted an art night. The room was packed. Parents, staff, former students. She dimmed the lights and let the wall of voices glow under soft lamps. One by one, children walked up and pointed to their art. Some shared their stories. Others just stood quietly. But everyone felt it. The power of expression without shame. Of pain without hiding. Of love without conditions. And as the night came to a close, Clara looked at the wall, now layered in color, truth, and time. It had become more than she ever imagined. It was a living timeline of healing, built by children brave enough to draw the things no one else could say. And as she turned off the lights and closed the door behind her, she whispered the same words she always did. Thank you for trusting me. I will never stop listening. In the early days of the new year, a boy named Tomas joined the class. He was 6, tall for his age, and had a habit of flinching every time someone spoke his name too loudly. He rarely met anyone's eyes, and during activities, he kept his arms folded tightly across his chest, even when holding a pencil. On his first day, he didn't draw. On his second, he scribbled over the paper with the side of a crayon, not creating images, just noise and color. Clara watched without judgment. She had seen this before, the chaos of a child who had not yet found a safe container for his pain. She offered him crayons and a small tin marked with a hand-painted sun, but Tomas pushed it away. I don't draw, he muttered. Clara smiled gently. That's okay. Sometimes the drawings find you. He didn't respond, but the next day, he picked up the tin and didn't let go of it all morning. Eventually, a drawing came, a mess of brown lines that looked, at first glance, like nothing. But when Clara looked closer, she saw a pattern. Rows, thick marks, a corner of red. She asked, "What's this part?" Tomas looked down, barely whispering. "That's the corner I hide in." His voice cracked slightly, and then he said no more. But that was enough. The image said what he could not. The red, Clara would later learn, was fear. With Ruth's help, they began tracking his behavior and building a timeline. He flinched when doors slammed. He recoiled from sudden movements. He only ate half his lunch, always saving the rest. When asked why, he shrugged and said, "Just in case." That phrase haunted Clara. In case of what? No child should be planning for the worst before they even know how to spell it. Then came the drawing that changed everything. Tomas brought it to Clara himself. 3 figures. One with angry black scribbles for a face, one curled up beneath a table, and one standing in a doorway holding a flashlight. "That one's you," he said softly. "You keep the dark away." Clara didn't speak. She just placed her hand over the page. She would keep the dark away for as long as it took. Tomas's home situation quickly came into focus. Ruth and Clara filed the necessary reports, and CPS took immediate action. His uncle, his legal guardian, was found to have a long record of neglect and emotional abuse. The home was unstable. Tomas was removed within 72 hours and placed in a foster care with a family already experienced in trauma-informed care. He didn't cry when he left, but before stepping out the door, he handed Clara a folded page with a red sun at the top. Inside, it simply read, "Now I get to draw in peace." Clara added that drawing to the wall of voices immediately. She placed it near Jonah's tree and Maya's vase. The red sun stood out against the cool tones around it, a bright, bold announcement that healing had begun. It reminded Clara that while some drawings whispered, others proclaimed, and both were equally powerful. That week, a former student returned to visit, Ezra, now nearly 10, taller, more confident. He stood in front of the wall for a long time, hands in his pockets. "It's still here," he said. "I thought maybe you'd take it down." Clara shook her head. "It stays, as long as there are kids who need it." Ezra nodded. "I think I want to be a counselor when I grow up." One of the good ones, like Ruth. One that listens. Later that day, Ruth came by with news. She had nominated Clara for a state-level educator award, one reserved for those whose methods had not only impacted education, but transformed lives. You didn't just teach kids how to count or write, she said. You taught them how to exist, how to speak without fear, how to be heard before they even knew what words to use. Clara was humbled, of course, but she deflected. I didn't do it alone, she said. They did the hard part. They trusted me. They handed me their pain in colors. Ruth smiled, and you didn't look away. That night, Clara stood before the wall again, alone in the classroom. She reached out and touched Tomas's red sun. Keep shining, she whispered. Someone else is looking for your light. The days moved forward, filled with the familiar sounds of tiny footsteps, laughter echoing down hallways, and the gentle scratch of crayons on paper. But beneath all that, something deeper had taken root in the classroom. A culture of expression, a quiet revolution where every drawing was treated like a key. The wall of voices stood tall and full, now requiring a second panel just to hold the overflow of stories. One day, Clara introduced a new exercise. She placed a blank canvas at the front of the room with the words, "Tell me without telling me," written above it. Children could anonymously add shapes, colors, or marks throughout the week. Anything they wanted to say without having to explain. On the first day, it remained untouched. By the second, a small yellow swirl appeared in one corner. Then came a blue streak, a red triangle, a cluster of green dots like falling rain. By Friday, the canvas was full, a chaotic, beautiful storm of meaning. Clara didn't interpret aloud. She simply labeled it our truth. And the children knew. They felt it. It was theirs. That canvas, like the wall, was a mirror. One boy walked up to it and said, "It looks like how my chest feels when I miss my dad." Another whispered, "I think this is what it looks like inside dreams that hurt." That afternoon, Clara received a message from the foster mother of Eliana, the girl who once wrote, "It's my turn now." The woman wrote, "She draws every day now. Her therapist says it's her strongest tool. She says her teacher taught her how to talk with pictures. She says that's how she knew she was worth saving." Clara pressed the phone to her chest, closing her eyes. That was it. That was why she had never walked away. The next week, an artist from a local gallery visited the daycare to see the wall. She stood silently before it for nearly half an hour, then turned to Clara and said, "This isn't a wall. It's a monument, a tribute to survival." Clara simply nodded. She'd always believed that the bravest thing a child could do was draw the truth. And the bravest thing an adult could do was believe it. Spring returned, and with it came warmth, blossoms, and more stories. Clara began organizing the files. Over 100 drawings now, each one with a name, a date, a small note, some marked as evidence, some simply kept as remembrance. These weren't just classroom records. They were proof of presence, proof that a child had been seen when it mattered most. She began work on a book, not for profit, not even for publication, at least not yet. Just a collection, a curated archive titled, "What the Children Told Me." She scanned each drawing, pairing it with a short story or reflection. Some were hard to look at, others so full of light it made her cry. She wasn't just honoring their pain. She was documenting their courage. At home, the wall above her writing desk had become its own tribute. A framed photo of Jonah's tree, a copy of Noah's swing, a small replica of Maya's vase. And in the center, a quote she had once scribbled on a sticky note and never removed. They drew what they could not say. I listened, and that made all the difference. One morning, Clara arrived to find a small group of children gathered quietly around the wall of voices. No one was talking. They were just looking. A new drawing had been added overnight. No one knew who had placed it. It showed a line of children holding hands, each with a heart above their heads. Above them, a large figure watched gently, smiling, arms open wide. Beneath it, just one word, safe. Clara didn't say anything. She simply placed the drawing in the center of the wall. And beside it, she added a new label, one she hadn't used before. Not Wall of Voices, not the garden, but this, where the hurt became hope. Because that was what she had witnessed. That was what the children had built, one drawing at a time. With the school year nearing its end, Clara took a moment each afternoon to sit quietly in front of the wall. Not to reorganize, not to teach, just to be with it. The wall had become a kind of heartbeat, not just of the classroom, but of everything she had become as a teacher. It pulsed with memory, sorrow, joy, healing. Each drawing was a breath, a pulse, a whisper from a child who once didn't think anyone would ever care enough to look. That week, Jonah returned. He was almost unrecognizable, taller, his voice deeper, a quiet confidence replacing the fearful stillness she remembered. His foster family had helped him grow, and now, he was thriving in a creative arts program. He asked to visit the wall. When he walked into the room and saw his tree still in place, he stood frozen, hand to mouth. "You kept it," he whispered. Clara nodded. "Of course I did. It was the beginning." Jonah reached into his backpack and pulled out a sketchbook. "I want to give something back," he said. Inside was a new drawing. A garden growing out of a cracked sidewalk, full of sunflowers. On each flower was a name: Ava, Ezra, Lila, Malik, Tomas, Maya, Riley, Eliana. Children he had never met, but whose stories had lived alongside his. In the center of the page was a single word, bold and unshakable: survivors. Clara placed his drawing in the highest spot on the wall. Jonah smiled through tears. "I used to think I was broken, but you showed me I was just beginning." He turned to the class, many of them too young to understand his full story, and said, "When you feel like nobody sees you, keep drawing. Someone will. Someone like her." Then he hugged Clara like a son who had returned home. That evening, Clara sat alone at her desk, holding the sketchbook Jonah had gifted her. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had been built. Not with bricks, but with trust, with paper, with courage. She looked around her classroom, then up at the wall, and realized it had grown far beyond her. The wall no longer needed her to speak for it. It spoke on its own. The final day of school arrived with the usual mix of chaos and celebration. Parents came early. Backpacks were stuffed with summer packets and sticky notes. Hugs were tighter, laughter louder. But in Clara's classroom, a hush lingered, especially near the wall of voices. Children gathered around it like pilgrims. Some said goodbye to their drawings. Others touched them with reverence. A few simply stared. As the last bell rang, Clara invited the children to sit in a circle. "Before you go," she said, "I want you to know something." She held up a blank page. "This is what your story looks like before you fill it. And every time you draw, every time you share what's in your heart, you fill the world with something only you can create. You are artists. You are storytellers. And your voices will always matter." Each child received a folder that day. Inside, a copy of one of their drawings and a note from Clara, handwritten, "This picture saved someone, even if it was just you." Some smiled. Some cried. One boy said, "I'm going to keep this forever." And Clara knew he meant it. These weren't just keepsakes. They were proof that they had survived something, grown through something, and helped build something lasting. After everyone left, Clara stayed behind. She turned off the overhead lights and let the late sunlight illuminate the wall one last time. She looked at each piece, each story. Then she pinned her own drawing. A classroom filled with color, and in the middle of it, a teacher kneeling beside a child, holding a crayon in one hand and a heart in the other. Underneath, she wrote, "Because I saw them, I saw myself." And then, with the classroom empty, the wall full, and the light fading into golden quiet, Clara whispered, "Thank you for drawing your way back to life." Sometimes, the most powerful stories are not shouted. They are drawn in silence. Through trembling hands, broken crayons, and pages stained with truths too heavy to speak aloud, children have found their voice. And Clara was the one who chose to listen. Not because it was her job, but because her heart recognized something the world often overlooks: that a picture isn't just art. It's evidence. It's confession. It's the beginning of healing. The wall of voices wasn't built with paint or nails. It was built with trust, with moments of stillness, with eyes that truly saw, and with a teacher who never asked a child to explain their pain before they were ready. What began as a single symbol drawn by a scared toddler became a sanctuary of stories, a space where trauma met safety and silence found its sound. These weren't just drawings. They were lives, save one image at a time. And what if this story was never just about Clara or her students? What if it's about us, about how often we walk past someone holding their pain in invisible ink. How often we ignore the strange behaviors, the too quiet children, the drawings that scream without sound. What if seeing them, really seeing them, is the first and most powerful thing we can do? If you made it this far, maybe this story touched something in you. Maybe it reminded you of a teacher, a child, or even your younger self. And if it did, let that be a seed. Share this story. Talk about it. Write your own version of the wall, wherever you are. Because the next child who needs to be seen might already be drawing. And if this video moved you, help us keep these stories alive. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments, what did you learn from Claire's wall? Your voice matters too. And just like those drawings, it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.